Welcome everybody to a special Shared Screens podcast, limited time only. It's called The Diary of Dooku, where we talk about everything under the sun, all about our favorite count. This is the first episode, and we got the biggest Dooku fan I could scour on the internet for is Bag of Soup. Soup, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jim Tasty?
I'm doing fantastic. Excited to talk about Dooku at large, and specifically the Tales of the Jedi episodes. But yeah, before we get into those episodes, what's your history with the character, and what is so intriguing about him to you?
So my history with Count Dooku as a character probably stems from the fact that when I was a kid, I was like, man, that lightsaber is cool. It's got that cool spike on it. It's curved. It's clearly unique. But then as I got older and you read, like, now it's Legends or just watch the Clone Wars series, it's like, this guy has depth. There's a lot more going on to him than quite a bit of other people in canon now, and even in Clone Wars, the show. So that drew me in a lot about it.
Yeah. I think for me too, definitely was a lightsaber. I remember my friend Braven got the the $20 like Walmart lightsaber back when the movie came out, Attack of the Clones, and I remember just seeing that curved hilt in it. It was so distinct. Because I even with obviously with Maul, that was like the first double blade, and that was a big deal too. But his lightsaber is very simple, and it's very similar in design to like a lot of the lightsabers we've seen in the past. And Dooku is just I think it's very emblematic, just like his character of what kind of person he is. And so I always was very attracted to that. And then I think over time, I remember seeing Attack of the Clones and just being intrigued and curious about this character because he was this bad guy, but like he wasn't like comically evil. Like Palpatine's a great villain, but he's just evil, right? Like a lot of the villains in Star Wars are usually very binary. They're either really evil or they're good and things like that. But he like wasn't that way. And like when he's talking to Obi-Wan in Attack of the Clones, he's like, hey, like join me, we can destroy the Sith. And like I was like, this is not normal. So I was always intrigued with the character way back when. And then just over time with a lot of the legend stories, the Clone Wars TV show, some of the new canon books, stuff like that. And then with these new Tales of the Jedi episodes, just further reinforce that tragic nature of the character, and you know where his fate lies. But we'll transition next to our next point of discussion. Favorite legend story. It can be canon actually, but just what's your favorite story featuring the Count of Sereno?
Well, as far as Legends goes, my favorite one is mostly because it's the one I remember. I haven't read much non-canon about Dooku in a while, but it's at one point Dooku was overseeing the Battle of Kashyyyk, and he had like a telemonitor kind of deal, and the signal cut out, so he had General Grievous sort of stand there like in a television antenna to boost the signal, and that's probably one of the funniest like non-canon things I can think of, and it's also has to do with Dooku.
Yeah. I think for me, my favorite Legends story, and this is kind of cheating, but it's not, is the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which isn't canon anymore. It goes really, obviously he's not in the book for long because he, in the movie and in the story he dies at the beginning, but just it really, like what's so awesome about books is that you can go inside the minds of all of these characters and what they're thinking and feeling, and just getting that insight into Dooku on how he's a bad guy, but he has some right motives. It's just how he goes about them is wrong, obviously. He's a Sith Lord after all. But yeah, like, and then realizing that like the jig is up at the end, and he's like, he wasn't meant to be the successor to Palpatine. And again, the tragic nature of that character, like I was like, dang, like this is so cool. Another legend story is Legacy of the Jedi, which we were talking before we recorded about like the Jedi Apprentice series, which was like primarily about young Obi-Wan when he was an apprentice to Qui-Gon. But there's a whole series of stories about Obi-Wan, but there's a book called The Legacy of the Jedi, and it goes through like 4 generations. It goes through Yoda, Dooku, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan. And the Dooku stories specifically talking about him as a Padawan, a knight, a master, and then obviously when he falls to the dark side as a Sith Lord. Just seeing these little snippets from each point of his life and how he comes to make decisions at each point of his life is super, super fascinating. And yeah, it's very cool. Definitely. It is a young adult book though, so it's like, you know, it's not the most like illuminating storytelling because it's geared towards like, you know, 12-year-olds or whatever. So, but it's still, I remember loving it back in the day and definitely checking out those books at the local library. So that's definitely one of my favorite Dooku stories. But let's get into Tales of the Jedi. Before we get into each episode, what's your overall impressions on the little trio of episodes we got about Count Dooku here?
So my biggest impression, actually, like the episodes are great to watch, but it's how they all sort of fit together, sort of chronologically. But they also fit with the current canon of Dooku Jedi Lost. It sort of slots in between a lot of the snippets that Asajj Ventress goes through when she's learning about Count Dooku.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. I haven't watched the Ahsoka episodes yet, but we did, or I did get to watch the Dooku episodes. And so I'm curious when I go back later on and watch the Ahsoka episodes, why Ahsoka's episode is the first episode, and then we get episodes 2, 3, and 4 with Dooku, and then we bookend that with 2 more with Ahsoka. I wonder if that's like chronological or what, but it's gonna be interesting to check that out. And then I wonder if there's gonna be any parallels with Dooku and Ahsoka, because again, we've talked, or I brought up like before, like the generations of these Jedi, and you know, Ahsoka is part of that lineage of like master to apprentice relationships that Dooku is a part of, starting from Yoda all the way down to Ahsoka. And it'll be interesting to see if there's any connections between those 2 characters, because it's not something that I would have thought about beforehand. But yeah, you know, that's what's so great about Star Wars is we always can get new purviews to existing characters and stories that we already know, and then think about them in, you know, unique and different ways. But yeah, I'll be interested to check that out. I also gotta say the animation looks amazing. Like going from Clone Wars to Rebels, back to season 7 of Clone Wars, and then to this, like this style of animation just keeps getting better and better and better. Like it's crazy, not only with like the character models, but like some of the scenery and effects and stuff like that. Like yeah, like there was a couple scenes, I think in the second Dooku episode, when they land at that spaceport, and like the massive spaceport with like all the buildings and lights. I was like, dang, this looks pretty freaking good. I was like I was already impressed with that animation style, but again, it just got better, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I can't wait for like the next story and the next evolution of this tech. Like I was just excited to see that. But let's go into episode 1 of the Dooku trio, but it's technically episode 2 of Tales of the Jedi, entitled Justice. What were your quick overall thoughts on this episode before we dive in like point by point?
My quick overall thoughts on Justice was the setting was pretty fantastic, and the ship is reminiscent of the Mon Calamari small fighters, because with the rotating segments.
Yeah.
as far as the setting, it was like, oh look, it's a ramshackle town. That's not something you usually see in Star Wars. You usually see like bustling metropolises or even like remote villages, but nothing looks so as downtrodden as this one village. So it's a unique setting.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes here. I said it looked like Victorian era England, like it was like very like 18th century, 19th century like vibes. Which again, what's so cool about Star Wars is like you can throw any kind of setting or vibe or look into Star Wars and it can work. Um, yeah, seeing like the droids like busted down but still operating, it was like it just felt like something we hadn't seen before in Star Wars. But we'll do a quick plot recap here of this episode. So essentially, Count Dooku and Qui-Gon, the Jedi, are called in to investigate the disappearance of Senator Dagonet's son. I'm assuming it's the Chancellor who called this in, because I think that, I mean, that's what we know from like episode 1 and things like that, like the Chancellor or some, yeah, because we'll talk about like the Senator didn't know, so like that was interesting. We'll talk about that later. But the Senator's son gets kidnapped. Dooku and Qui-Gon are called in to figure out what's going on. They quickly realize that the entire town is in on it. And then they realize, because the Senator is so corrupt and he's not looking out for them, that they felt like this was their only course of action. The Senator, unbeknownst to the Jedi, he rallies like a militia force to, look for his son. He encounters the Jedi and some of the militia that they take the Jedi to the son. And the Senator's like, arrest all these guys, like, let's get out of here, like, let's do this. And Dooku, and this is another interesting point that we'll bring up on each episode, but Dooku says or the Senator's like, hey, you serve the Senate, you serve me. And Dooku's like, no, like, we serve the people of the Republic, and so we're gonna side with these folks over you, even though we were called in to fix your son. And then the militia forces start fighting against the townsfolk and the Jedi. The Jedi don't really fight; they kind of just block and play defense. But a lot of the townsfolk get wounded or killed just because the militia force are trained better. And then Dooku taps into the dark side and starts choking the Senator when he's like, after this, I'm going to burn this whole town. Like, he just gets super evil. He's like, I'm going to burn this whole town. Like, I'm going to ruin these people. He uses the dark side. He pushes Qui-Gon back, which allows Qui-Gon inadvertently to open the door and free the son, to bring him to his dad and to break Dooku out of the spell. And then everything chills out after that. And then Dooku has this interesting point at the end, and he's like, I wonder if any meaningful change will come of this. And that was an interesting quote that I picked up. And then again, it kind of gets further reinforced throughout each episodes. But one of the things that was interesting too, again, it's not like a one for one, but there are dogs in Star Wars.
Yes.
Like, he had like a longer tail, but like that's like a dog, dude. Like, what did you think about like having like a normal like animal in Star Wars? And I know that has happened before, but like there's something about it for me, just seeing the dog, that was like, okay. And then like with the whole Victorian era vibe, I was like, okay, like I see where they're going with this.
I thought that was pretty interesting to see a more normal looking animal. I know you didn't watch episode 1 that started with Ahsoka, but that one also features some newer Star Wars animals, at least to my knowledge.
Okay.
Like there's a bear dog. Like, it looks like a bear, but it's the size of a dog, sort of. Like, there's fun new animals in this new series. So it's pretty cool to see different kinds of like wildlife going around. It's not like a Porg, it's not a Wookiee, it's not an Ewok. It's like more relatable. Like, here's a dog, I got a dog in real life, or there's a cat in real life. You can see
Yeah.
the one-to-ones instead of like it's a teddy bear thing with a spear. For Ewok, yeah.
Yeah, usually with Star Wars, when they incorporate creatures that are supposed to be like dogs or, whatever, like some Earth equivalent, they'll have like two extra legs or like
Mhm.
something else like that. And obviously, this tail's a little bit longer. It's more like a lemur tail or something like that. But like, I was like, okay, this is like pretty much a dog. So I thought that was cool just because, I mean, I love dogs and I think dogs are awesome. So I'm glad dogs can comfort people in the galaxy from far, far away. Um, at the beginning of this episode, the music and the like tones were very eerie, and it was like super. I just thought it was super dope. Like when they land and it's just like uncomfortable, unsure. When they arrive to the bar, another great like cantina sequence. Um, I just love the aura that Dooku emanates, where like he's just so sure of himself at all times that like he is like not afraid, no matter what situation he's in. And so him walking in here, he's just like yeah, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this no matter what. What did you think about that part of the episode with the whole bar scene?
The bar scene was pretty interesting. He walks in, much akin to Ben Kenobi walking in with Luke to Mos Eisley Cantina. Everyone stops and looks at him, but like the sureness of Dooku when he just asks where's the kid is a little bit different. Like it's not the worn and torn Ben Kenobi. It's very idealistic and sure of himself and young Count Dooku. Like, well, I guess he's just Master Dooku at that point, but it's just a different kind of setting than you're used to for, hey, let's walk into the bar, everyone stops and turns. So it's the same Star Wars trope with a nice little spin on it.
Yeah, he doesn't even ask anybody specifically, right? He just asks the bar at large, and yeah. I obviously like throughout each episode, it's like him getting a little bit older, but yeah, this one he's got to be like, man, I gotta guess like 30s, maybe early 40s, because yeah, like by the time of Phantom Menace and the Clone Wars, he's definitely up there in age. But yeah, he's always even like this is definitely a young Dooku. Um, but yeah, like it was so funny when he's like, "Where's the child?" And then like that lady's like, I can show you, and um, hey, our senator sucks. Like, look at our town. Like he's just like he doesn't care about us at all, which just further reinforces that like their senator's corrupt. The Senate has like a huge corruption problem. The guy Dagonet has been a lifelong politician, so just further reinforcing that point of how the Senate can be ripeness for corruption. That bad actors in this system can still cause great harm. But yeah, and then everyone turns up and like gets ready to tussle when she reveals like we're all in on it. Like I was just like, oh yeah, like this is like a group effort. Like it just makes me think like, man, what must have life been like where they were like, all right, we gotta like kidnap the senator's son. Like it must have been so down and desperate. But yeah, Dooku's very stern with the townsfolk. He's just like, let me know. I'll show you why I'm here. He does like the classic, whip out the lightsaber and place it on the table. I don't think it was analogous to this, but it reminded me of Kyle Katarn in Jedi Outcast when he goes to the bar in Nar Shaddaa, and he's like asking the bartender questions, and the bartender's like, whatever, blah blah. And then he shows his lightsaber, and the bartender's like, oh, like okay, like I'm talking to somebody who like can mess some folks up. So very very cool. The chime and the gong of each like title intro sequence, it was super sick. When it was like Justice or the Sith Lord or corruption or whatever. Like I thought that was super cool. I thought Two Ton was a super dope droid design. I don't know if you thought that as well.
I thought it was very interesting. It's a more bulky droid than we're used to seeing in Star Wars, like the big. It looks like the front end of a '70s car, sort of, with the big headlights. But it's a walker kind of droid, very counter to the first droid we see in the series with a tiny R2 type head with the chicken walker legs. They both probably function about the same in a town like this, but just the differences and like the giving it a personality with like big headlights for eyes, with it sort of being like out in some places where it looks like oh it's been beat up, it's been used very like consistently over the years. It's very nice.
Yeah, like you brought up a good point with like the droid designs of Star Wars. Like usually when we see those individualized droids, they're like in human form, or they're like little astromech droids like R2D2 or what have you. This droid, and then when we've seen industrial droids in Star Wars, they're kind of droids that don't have personalities. Like they're just like the automated, task oriented droids. But this one was a massive industrial type droid, but it had the personality with the headlights and things like that. So it definitely was something we haven't seen before, especially with that design. And when it kind of like sized up against Dooku, I was like, oh man, this is a big droid. Again, I'm sure Dooku would have no problem taking it down, but it was still like an interesting kind of sequence that we really haven't seen before. They get taken to the sun, and then immediately the son's like, yeah, like my dad sucks. Like, look at these townsfolk. No wonder why they kidnapped me. Like, I get it. Like, no problem. Which I thought was interesting because a lot of times in stories like these, I mean, with Andor too, we're seeing the disparity of like the people who have it and the people who don't. And seeing the son realize the error of his dad's ways, I was like, interesting. Like again, Dooku says that at the end, like, will any meaningful change come of this? We don't know specifically with this planet, with this senator, but I think we know like with the Senate at large, no meaningful change comes. So again, very kind of a dour note, but we have the quote here. The senator's like, hey, you serve the Senate, and then Dooku's like, no, we serve the people of the Republic. That's about it for that episode, unless you have anything more to add.
Yeah, the only other thing I want to add is like when we see the militia sort of clash with the townsfolk, we can see that the townsfolk have more fortified positions, they have vantage points, but they waver at the thought of shooting them. Like we get a close up on one of them, sort of shaking when they're about to pull the trigger, whereas the militia people sort of they just go for the kill, they just go for the shots. You can just see the difference between the ideals of the corrupted senator and his forces versus very idealistic Dooku, so we're just only guarding at first, and the townsfolk who just want better for themselves, but didn't necessarily want to take it the whole way, but sort of got forced to play all their cards. And then the change from Dooku once he sees that it's not going well with just defending this, it sort of just shows like, wow, Dooku is just opposed to the corruption, and he's not against taking it in his own hands, unlike Qui-Gon is very opposed to choking out the guy, or in most of Star Wars legends and canon, Jedi are mostly very pacifist. You fight to disarm, you don't fight to kill. So it's interesting seeing like the sparks of the dark side come up just in that one fight.
Yeah. The again with like the quality of the animation, seeing Dooku's face in that moment where he still hasn't fallen, but like in that moment where he realizes like the shock and horror of what he's done there, it just shows that like at this point, this character still has that sense of morality that a Jedi should have. That's a great point that you brought up. So moving on to episode 3, choices. So overall impressions on this episode? What'd you like, dislike, intrigued?
I liked seeing Mace Windu, who's more by the book than when we see him in like episode 2 and 3, where he started going hog wild with enjoying the battles. Like he's more of, oh, the rules say we can't do this, and it's just started interesting seeing a more withheld, restrained Mace in the picture, as opposed to where he's not the strong-willed one, other than Anakin, you know. So that's a cool like disposition between what we think of him in typical canon versus what we're seeing here. Also, the you can see Dooku's getting older. You can see that he's getting a little bit less like content with his situation and like how things are being operated as a whole throughout this episode. Uh, I think that's my big picture thoughts on the episode. What about you?
Yeah, it was interesting. Again, just like all these little details, like seeing Mace at this point where he is a master, but he's not on the council. Um, so just seeing that character at this point of his life was super dope. Um, Seeing again uh, the like the ideas, the sparks of this like worldview, ideology, as Dooku says in this episode, start to like fester a little bit for Dooku here, where he's like, realizing again another corrupt senator that we see throughout this episode. So just seeing like this evolution of the character from last episode to this episode was awesome. Yeah, I said the animation I felt like in this episode was really really great, especially with like the set design and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, so we'll get into the episode now. So um, Dooku and Windu are sent to retrieve the body of Master Khatri, which I'm not too familiar with, so I'm assuming this is a newer Jedi created for this show. Again, in the same ship, so I don't know if this is like Dooku's ship. I think the Jedi don't have like personal ships, right? They're kind of given ships on loan from, the Republic and stuff like that. So, um, yeah, maybe like it's like you go to like a CarMax or whatever, or man, what are those car rental services at airports? But like, he shows up and he's like, "Hey, you got this model again?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And then he's like, "All right, I'll take that again." Like, maybe.
If we can skip ahead an episode for a quick second, I think this might be Dooku's personal ship, because we see in the next episode, if we get into characters that's in that next episode, Yaddle has her own ship, and it's not a A-wing, it's not a typical Y-wing type fighter that we see in most of the Clone Wars series. It is a smaller ship. I think they are personalized ships, because we see in the Clone Wars TV series, Anakin has that weird boxy ship throughout most of the series. So I think the Jedi might have personal ships. But I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, I think with that ship, because they get it in the movie, and it's like they just find it, and then they just like they use it for a few episodes in the show, just because of the sequential nature of like some of those episodes, and then I think after that it gets destroyed, or it just like whatever, something else happens to it. But yeah, I wonder too if it's just like either on loan from the Republic or just the Jedi Temple. They have like 1,000 ships, and you can take whatever you want as long as you sign in and sign out or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, that's it's something like small that I noticed. But yeah, Windu wants to go buy the book, but Dooku wants to investigate further, which I wrote down. Again, that feels very a piece of Windu. He's always been a traditionalist with the Jedi. And then Dooku isn't like a maverick, but he presses like the purviews of like the Jedi protocols by like wanting to investigate this death further, which I thought was a great combination of like further adhering to his character, but also like wanting to do like more than what was given to him, because somebody like Qui-Gon would totally go off the book and do whatever, like whatever. And then like Dooku isn't that way, but he still within his own character traits manages to, make a choice that feels true to the character while still like, doing more than just like, because like Wendy just wanted to take the body and dip, like, and that was it, that's crazy to me. But I don't know. They it turns out the planet that they land at is called Raxus Secundus, which I'm not sure if that is mentioned in canon before, but I know the planet Raxus and the planet Raxus Prime have been mentioned in canon and in Legends numerous times, and so it was great to see. I'm assuming a planet in that system. It did look kind of Raxus-y, not as like junked up as like Raxus Prime, but very industrialized. I noticed this, and it makes sense where the story goes, but the senator was super scared when explaining the details of the ambush. And I was like, why are you afraid to like, because at first I thought he was in on it. And so
Yeah,
I was like,
that's what I thought. They do a pretty good job misleading you into thinking, oh, it's clearly the senator who's doing it again.
yeah,
Just like the first episode.
yeah. And so at first I was like, he doesn't want to like out himself that he like helped kill this Jedi. We find out later what the true cause is. But they get taken to the crime scene where Master Katri died. And Dooku susses out that something is amiss when investigating the crime scene. They see like lightsaber slashes, they see like blaster bolts in different spots, and they realize like, hey, the blaster shots, didn't come from like away from the ship. They came from like where the ship landed. Like, what's going on here? Again, Dooku kind of teasing his dark side inevitability, immediately whips out his lightsaber and is like, I'll cut you all. Like, let's go. The fight scene here I thought was so dope. I wrote Dooku kicks so much ass here. So the senator panics and he's like, it wasn't me. The guards did it. The guards like set up this plot, and he goes to run to the Jedi, and the guards just instantly just shoot him in the back, which I guess, if you're going to go down, you might as well take someone down with you. But I thought this fight scene was super dope, specifically Dooku's like fighting scenes and style. When he did that behind the back block, that was like so dope. And then he like cuts a tree and pushes it, and like he like, because one of Dooku's traits is that he's like a master swordsman and master combatant, and so yeah, seeing him kick ass here was so dope. What did you think of this fight scene?
All the points you made are very valid, and I also thought them too. But the thing that stuck out to me more was when the droids popped out. You can see the shells of the future assassin droids you see in the Clone Wars series, Grievous as guards. You could see like the structure of those droids in those droids that popped out. That's pretty cool. You can see another evolution of droids and how they fight, just fighting alongside those guys too. The other thing was the scene towards the end of the fight where it's sort of smoky and you see the sabers in the background that's very Darth Vader in the end of Rogue One, like the newer version of it where it's smoky. You just see the lightsaber glow. That was pretty cool looking to me.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me too of Attack of the Clones when they bring down that control ship and it crashes into the sand and that sand shockwave goes out. And the droids and clones are fighting, but then there's some Jedi like in there too, like kind of reminding me of that scene as well. So yeah, Mace and Dooku take out all the droids and the bodyguards except for one, and the rebels slash guards explained that they didn't like that the senator was selling away the rights to the planet at the expense of the people, so he was probably selling like land rights and usage rights for different resources, just to different companies. And then another, kind of to reiterate the point from the first episode, the guards too had like these weird like Wolverine claws too on their hands. That looked cool. I don't know what that was about. It looked cool though.
I thought it might just be part of their armor because they were
Yeah,
exclusively using blasters. They didn't really do any hand to hand. So
yeah, yeah. I don't know if they would actually use that for combat. Maybe it was just all ceremonial since they were like the guards for the senator. But it looked cool. I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, the last guard says the Jedi are lapdogs at the Senate. The Jedi only keep the peace for the rich and powerful, which kind of reiterates that point from the senator in the first episode where he's like, "Hey, you obey me." Um, Later on, back at the Capitol, Dooku's talking to that guard in a jail cell, and the big quote that I took away was Dooku saying to the guard, "Hey, your ideology, while faulty, does have its points." So he's kind of agreeing with the rebels and the guards, but he's like, "Hey, the way you went about this is not the right way." Like, you know, um, and it's interesting too. Like, we see him at the funeral, but he doesn't seem particularly like weeping or sad about the death of Master Khatri. And obviously, when there's 10,000 Jedi, you're not going to know everyone, super personal. Um, but I just thought that was interesting that like one of the big defining things we get out of this episode is that he agrees with like the quote unquote bad guys. And then like when one of his fellow Jedi dies, you know, he's sad, but he's not like, mournful. Um, uh, and then, yeah, I also wrote down the quote, "Will they be happy with your tactics?" Because Mace Windu's like, "Hey, you found out who killed Master Khatri, but like, the senator died. Like, there's a ton of collateral damage." And Dooku's like, "Hey, I have no problem explaining, my actions. Like, I got the job done. Like, that's all that matters." Um, and then the guards also says, or no, Dooku goes to Mace after that and he says, he's like, "Hey, I have a question for you." And he says, "Will the Jedi truly keep peace if they are obedient to the Senate?" Again, further reinforcing that same point. Like, hey, the Jedi might be cool, but if they're, obedient, if they're, held liable by this corrupt organization, like, then what good are the Jedi if they are, forced to do the bidding of this corrupt organization? So I just thought that was interesting to further reinforce that point about the relationship between the Jedi and the Senate. What did you have to say about that?
another parallel between the first two episodes is Count Dooku in the first episode goes, "I can't release your son yet. This is still under investigation." In the second episode, he parallels that with, "We can't just leave here, even though this guy's acting shady." Because at one point, Mace Windu says, "This guy's hiding something. Let's take it back to the council." Dooku parallels that first episode with the second episode with the, "No, we need to investigate this now," and that leads him further down the path of, well, why am I doing this by the books of the Jedi if I'm not getting to the root of the problems?
Mm.
Which is another thing that we see in if we go back to canon books, Dooku Jedi Lost, he does that a few times with his first Padawan Rail, Averos. They investigate at I believe it was a casino planet or just a casino kind of area, and they find corruption in the thing. It's like, well, we could just report this back to the authorities on Coruscant, but instead Dooku goes, "No, we need to investigate this further," gets himself involved. So that's something cool to see within the current canon character of Dooku. The inquisitiveness just leads him to opposition of the traditional Jedi like rules and standards.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not only tying back to that first episode, but yeah, other existing canon. And then another cool little canon development we got in this episode is at this point, Mace Windu officially gets chosen for a council seat. It turns out Master Khatri was a Jedi council member, and since she passed, there was an open seat, and Windu gets picked for that seat. And we sense some jealousy from Dooku here, and so I'm not sure if it was like a brace between those two, like if those were the two potential candidates or whatnot. But there was some jealousy there. What did you feel about that end scene for the episode?
For me, what stuck out was the fact that Mace wasn't on the council yet, is what they told us with that. So that just sets it in the timeline because Dooku becomes a member of the council shortly before defecting to create the separatist movement
Mm-hmm.
or take the head of the separatist movement. So that just sets the timeline in my head of so the first episode was shortly after Qui-Gon Jinn was taken as an apprentice. The second episode happens after that, clearly. But the fact that he's the master, he's not on the council yet, just puts it in this timeline with what was it? Actually, the thing I just related back to because with the casino thing
Mm-hmm.
and corruption within Senate and Jedi. But that was what got me, and then I think it was more of less of a jealousy and more of a, well, you want to do it by the book. This isn't changing the Jedi the way I think it needs to be changed, because you can see that he doesn't want to do it by the books. He wants to do it with a way that gets things done properly.
Yeah.
Even if it's not by the book proper, it's to the end point proper, you know?
No, that's a good point. And yeah, you brought up that interesting point of like, yeah, because Dooku gains a seat on the council too, but obviously it's not at this point. And so yeah, just setting the timeline, and I'm sure Wikipedia or something will have like the specific BBY dates or whatever
Yeah.
soon, because that'll definitely be interesting to see, like bang bang bang, like here's where it's before or after certain stories. So that's gonna be super exciting to jump into. But we'll transition now to the final episode featuring Count Dooku, entitled "The Sith Lord." This was a freaking dope episode. What are your overall thoughts and impressions on this episode?
So my overall thoughts was it's pretty clear that sandwiched on either end of episode 1 with at the start we see deleting the Camino. We see him talking about, oh, Qui-Gon found a Sith. At the end it's Qui-Gon was killed by the Sith. Here's the funeral. So it sandwiches it in a very concrete timeline for even the most Lusa fans. As long as they've seen the trilogies, you should know where this one takes place. The other thing I got was Sheev's smile after the lightsaber battle was like, oh, you can see the Emperor Palpatine start coming in, even though at this point he should still be just a senator, I think.
Remember he
right
he gets elected during this movie.
Oh, does he? Okay, right.
Because in episode 1, he's a senator and he's like, hey, this chancellor sucks. Like, make me chancellor and I'll like get this Naboo situation
that
sorted
was
out.
part of it. Yeah.
And then he gets elected chancellor and he's like, sorry, I can't do anything. And then that's when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan go to Naboo again. Yeah, when I saw that this was set during episode 1, I was like, oh shit. I was like, let's go. Like having it set during a story that we all know and love. I mean, I love episode 1, but like that we know so well. Definitely definitely made me smile. I'm always a fan of I don't know what you call it, integral stories. I always think of like Lion King 1.5, like side stories that like happen during like a main story. And so like when we see Qui-Gon about to go up to the council, and I was like, oh man, like, okay, this is like, right. I think that was like when he's like, hey, we're going back to Naboo kind of thing. Like, it was just so dope. Seeing like how, this was after the duel between Maul and Qui-Gon on Tatooine, that a lot of the Jedi still don't believe that the Sith are here, even though Qui-Gon directly encountered one. Like, just shows like the I don't know if I would say arrogance, but just ignorance maybe of the Jedi, that like because we see it in 2 and 3 as well. Mm-hmm. But obviously the threat is more apparent at that point. But like at this point too, where it's still kind of a new threat, they're like, oh nah, they're, we don't think that's a Sith yet. I mean, Jocasta Nu is like, she's nice, but I think she represents a lot of what's wrong with the Jedi. But
it's like a complacency, sort of like,
yeah,
there hasn't been a Sith in so many years, there can't be a Sith now. Like, I feel like that's what the sort of general feeling of everyone is, because the start of the episode, Yaddle's also like, wow, yeah, there's no such thing as Sith. Why are you panicking? And at the end, it's like, nope, I was wrong.
Yeah. Which shout out to Yaddle. We now know that Yoda talks in riddles and backwards for we don't
Personal
know
reasons, I guess.
personal reasons. Yeah, because Yaddle talks like most folks. We again, like we'll talk about it later, but like in Legends, there's a pretty cool Yaddle story about like how she passes because again she's in and I love the little intricacy of the canon here where she is on the council in the beginning of episode 1 and then she's not on it at the end, and it's because she resigns at some point during this episode. I thought that was super fascinating, and then obviously she's just not shows up at all anymore because she dies here. But I thought this was a cool canon version of what happens to her between the stories, but the movies. But yeah, the episode begins with Count Dooku deleting Kamino from the Jedi archives, which one, any connection to Attack the Clones I'm all about. To see it actually happen was super dope. And then we'll talk about it later, but we can bring it up now. But we see Dooku still, being still a part of the Jedi Order, but he's dipping his toe in the dark side, and working for the Sith, because as we see later, he's like, hey, I've done everything you asked to Palpatine, to Sidious, and Sidious like, hey, I'm gonna still need more. And just an interesting time for Dooku to be a part of the Jedi, but he killed Sifo Dyas, he ordered the clone army. Like, man, what did you think about Dooku at this specific point in his life?
Well, if we take at the start of the episode where he's deleting the archives, he's still a Jedi, which tells me, per current canon, Sifo Dyas is still alive for at least a little bit longer, because I think he dies at some point during the middle part where episode 1's happening. Because Sifo Dyas is on what's Count Dooku's home planet?
Sereno.
So yeah, Sifo Dyas shows up as Sereno when Count Dooku takes power.
Yeah.
So Sifo Dyas is going mad a bit, but at this point in time, but he's not dead yet. So the fact that Count Dooku has like his codes to get all the stuff done under Sifo Dyas's name instead of Dooku is pretty interesting to me. Like, he's clearly controlling more than what we think he's controlling normally, even though he's still part of the Jedi. He's not the leader of the Separatists yet, but he's talking to Shiva. So at the start, Shiva's clearly telling him what to do as the senator.
Yeah,
which is interesting because that's not usually seen. It's usually, oh, she is doing the strings as the Supreme Chancellor or as the Emperor, not as Senator Palpatine.
Yeah. With the last episode choices, it just made me think of like, because Palpatine enacts this grand plan for the Sith like in the span of episode 1 and beyond. But I was like, man, what was Palpatine doing for all those years beforehand? Like, man, it's just so fascinating to think about. But yeah, chatter is abound in the Jedi Temple as Qui-Gon reports his encounter with a Sith Lord, which, yeah, sets the time frame during episode 1. So this is like right in the middle of the movie. We get that awesome conversation with Dooku and Qui-Gon, Liam Neeson's Qui-Gon. And again, Dooku has like 1 foot, in the Jedi, 1 foot in the Sith. And he's, I wonder what he was asking or where he was coming from when he was asking about the Sith, because he clearly knows Sidious, but like,
I don't think he knows about Maul. I think he just knows about Sidious at this point in time. So I think that's what he was confused about.
Okay.
Unless I'm reading this wrong, but I think that's what was confusing to Dooku and as character is he thought it was just him and Sidious, the Rule of 2, not him, Sidious, and Maul.
Yeah. No, that totally tracks because Sidious definitely would not be like, "Yo, Dooku, I have my apprentice Maul over here doing, work." So, like, yeah, so that totally tracks. But yeah, because Dooku was like inquisitive and like, so you encountered a Sith, like, tell me more, all that good stuff, blah blah blah. So I think he was curious on like, what the Sith were up to beyond what he was helping out with. Um, we get this awesome Obi-Wan Dooku connection because in episode 2, Attack of the Clones, when Obi-Wan gets captured on Geonosis and Dooku interrogates him in his cell, he's like, hey, Qui-Gon would have, probably joined me. Like, he always spoke so highly of you, blah, blah, blah. And we get this like awesome little exchange here where Qui-Gon's like, yeah, like Obi-Wan, he really carries himself well. Like, yeah, like someday, and then Duke is like, yeah, I hope I get to meet him someday. Like, I was like, oh man, like seeing it, I wish they would have gotten to meet like when they were both Jedi. And it was never meant to be, but that's okay. We then get this awesome conversation between Yaddle and Dooku where, they're kind of exploring the virtues and maybe the faults of the Jedi Council. And Yaddle seems to be pretty understanding of where Dooku's coming from here. And then we get this awesome visual like metaphor where Yaddle walks away and she walks into the light, like into the sun. And we see Dooku walk away and he walks away into like the darkness, into the shadows. And I was like, perfect. Like, let's go. Like, I love these visual metaphors.
Yeah, the visual storytelling in all 3 of these episodes is pretty on point. Just like the backgrounds, the use of light in this case, the blaster marks in the previous episode. Like without anything happening, just looking at the backgrounds tells a story in itself too, which is really cool.
Yeah. So then we cut to post Battle of Naboo, and Dooku is at man, I don't know what the tree is called, but like the great tree of the Jedi Temple. And he is very visibly angry and mournful at the loss of Qui-Gon. And he holds the Council and the Jedi pretty much responsible for, his death because as we see in Phantom Menace, like, the Council, they don't really do anything to back, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan with this conflict on Naboo. Like, because like in episode 1, Padme is like, hey, I'm going back to fight for my people. Like, you want to come? And Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are like, yeah, we'll go. But like, we don't go with the authority of like, the Senate or the, Jedi Order, everything like that. We're just going as like, friends. And so again, showing the failings of the Jedi, and the Republic and the Senate. And so Qui-Gon or Dooku holds Qui-Gon's death because of those factors. And Yaddle's like, hey man, like, I get it. Like the Council, like they definitely have their faults. Another little cool canon connection with Duke or Qui-Gon's funeral on Naboo and not on Coruscant. Just because we see Master Khatri get buried on Coruscant with that cool like light up Jedi funeral, and Qui-Gon gets buried, I guess. Man, I can't remember what the canon connection is, but like we know it's because in Return of the Jedi, Vader gets burned alive like on a pyre, and so I think that's like the old school traditional Jedi death, or like burial. And so that's why they're holding the burial or the funeral on Naboo. And Duke is like, I don't want to go. Like, I can't be cool with these folks if I go. Dooku then travels to the Works to confront Sidious about Qui-Gon's death. Again, showing this interesting like dichotomy of like he's doing a side hustle for the Sith, but like he still has these like personal connections and emotional attachments to like Qui-Gon and certain people, because and again, another connection to Attack of the Clones. Duke is like, hey, like Qui-Gon could have, he might have joined us. Like, why did your Sith Lord kill him? So I thought that was interesting. But what are your thoughts on, Qui-Gon or Dooku's like, fixation on, his attachment to Qui-Gon in terms of joining, but also like, how he lamented his death and held the Jedi Council responsible.
I think the key phrase here is in that same scene where he's talking about, your Sith killed Qui-Gon, is your ideals went too far. Because everyone's been telling Dooku the last 2 episodes, even in just this show, even if we don't take into account any of the other canon or legends, people tell Dooku, oh, you're taking this too far. Finally, Dooku says, no, your ideals went too far when you let your Sith get in the way of my personal matter of Qui-Gon. So I thought that was pretty interesting that he turns that line back around, puts it on Sidious instead. Because the last 2 episodes, people were like, oh, you're going too far. You're going too far. This time he says, no, you're going too far. So that's pretty interesting to me. It's like, oh, he finally sees like someone else cross the line, and he's not sure how he feels about it. Because you can see he sort of walks back and forth between, am I a Jedi or am I a Sith until Yaddle shows up.
Yeah. I love Sidious's line where he's like, hey, I lost an apprentice, so did you. Like, we're even. Like, it's a wash. Like, I thought that was pretty funny for some reason. Yaddle, though, followed Dooku on his way to the works. Again, I'm not sure how, Star Wars, radar works and everything like that, but Yaddle's like, she was like 50 feet behind Dooku. Like, how did he not see her in his rear view mirror? Like, I don't know, but Yaddle follows Dooku and confronts him and Sidious, and the whole time Yaddle's like appealing to Dooku's nicer nature. He's like, hey, or she's like, hey, you can make things right. You were right about the Jedi Council. Like, I feel like she was really making a good appeal here, which I think just makes his decision all the more tragic. What did you think about Yaddle like attempting to one last time to persuade Dooku?
It felt to me like a mirroring of Episode 3 when Mace Windu's confronting Sidious, and then Anakin barges in, and Windu's like, "If as long as you help me here, we're cool." It felt like a mirroring of that, and then much like Anakin in 3, Dooku in the 3rd episode of this trilogy of little shorts here also goes, "No, I'm a Sith."
Yeah,
and then turns on his Jedi friend. So I thought that was what stuck out to me visually, was like the echoing of things we've already seen. But as far as like how this conversation goes, like it felt like she was persuading him. I mean, we clearly know he goes over the dark side, but it felt like for a second maybe Yaddle doesn't die here. But then it goes into the fight, and it's like, okay.
Yeah. Sidious has this awesome quote where he says, "Remember what you told me." Again, Sidious is so much of a master manipulator that anytime somebody confides in him or offers emotional intimacy, he always will use that to twist that person to doing what he wants. And so I thought that was awesome because he's like, "Remember what you told me?" He said that you told me that the Jedi blindly serve a corrupt Senate that fails the Republic it represents. So again, we've seen this core belief of Dooku echo throughout these 3 episodes, be it from himself or what he bears witness to and what he learns from, of how the Senate can be easily corruptible, and that since the Jedi are obeisance to them, that sometimes they may be serving the wrong folks and in the wrong way. Yaddle appeals to Dooku's sensibilities, but he is too far gone. Dooku is like, I can't turn back now. He feels like he's too far gone. This duel kind of reminded me of, for obvious reasons, Attack of the Clones duel between Dooku and Yoda. I thought this one was actually like way cooler and way better because um, with Attack of the Clones, I mean Christopher Lee at that point was like 90 something, or late 80s, and so they had to do that with the stunt double, and it was also CGI, so they had to like do different camera cuts. Where this duel was like just full force, full go. I thought it was super awesome, and how again we see Dooku's fighting prowess at full display here when he's taking on Yaddle, and yeah, he's clearly the better combatant here. But what did you think about this duel, man? Was it cool?
I thought it was pretty cool. It was interesting that Yaddle doesn't use all the cool spinny flips and like twists that Yoda does, despite being same stature. But you can also see Dooku's prowess because canonically he's regarded as one of the best duelists of the Jedi. When it comes to like saber to saber, if you don't take into account anything else, he's considered to be one of the best there. And you can see how he, at first it's like pretty even, but he just slowly works her down. Right before the door drop, if we can get a little bit ahead to that scene, like you can see that Dooku's done his job at just working her down, making her like it's pretty obvious she's gonna lose the fight if it keeps going on. So it's like it's pretty cool to see his prowess, like against someone who should be at an equivalent level. Because in Clone Wars we see him fight Anakin and Obi-Wan pretty handily beat them, but here it's like they should be about the same. They're both masters. They both on like Jedi Council kind of level, even if Dooku's not may or may not be on it at this point. But like, I think that's pretty cool. Like, Sidious doesn't even need to do anything because Dooku's got this.
Yeah. Yeah, and then after Dooku crushes Yaddle, he gets like on his knees and just looks exhausted, and I think that's an awesome like physical manifestation of like almost like when Anakin cuts off Mace Windu's arm and then he gets on his knees and he's like, what have I done? It kind of reminded me of that in the same way of like there's one sense of thinking one way but then acting another. And obviously Dooku's actually committed multiple actions towards the dark side of the Sith, but like that manifestation in like fighting and like actually taking somebody out, and then he's like, okay, now I've like really gone too far, like I really can't turn back now. And so I don't know if this was official, but Palpatine, Sidious calls him apprentice here. And so just knowing the timeline, and obviously because Phantom Menace takes place over probably a couple weeks or something, maybe a couple days. He might have been dubbed apprentice like the minute Maul died or something. But this is like a pretty close timeline here. And so when he says apprentice and he says rise, it kind of echoed from Revenge of the Sith with Anakin. And so this kind of makes me think this was when he officially has been deemed, Sidious's apprentice, right?
I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, and I would need to go back and watch it again to like see if what it is exactly. But I don't think he gets called apprentice until after he kills Yaddle,
right?
Or like they think he killed Yaddle, because when he just goes for the confrontation, like of you went too far, it's closer to he's just conversing with him like, oh, this guy's like my partner in crime kind of thing. But I don't think I could be wrong. He could have said apprentice at the start of the conversation. But I don't think Sidious says apprentice until after Dooku fully goes to the dark side with killing Yaddle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. So I think this might be his official title bestowing. Although we don't get Darth Tyrannus yet, so maybe not. Yeah. And right before he kills Yaddle, when she's survives the door closing, but she's like physically exhausted, he's like, I only want to bring peace and order to the galaxy, which again echoes like Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, when he's going on his tirade to Obi-Wan, and Padme, um, and Yaddle. And again, this is like before the Clone Wars, before way more horrors occur. But Yaddle's like, what is your, what is your order like already wrought on our galaxy? Like so much suffering, and it's like, yeah, we're just getting started here. So yeah, and I thought, this was a cool way. Like I said earlier, like a cool way to kind of explain what happened to Yaddle, going out, in a triumphant way against, not necessarily Sidious, but like she sees him and she confronts him and Dooku, again, making that, Dooku or Sidious's rise that much more tragic, knowing it could have potentially been stopped here, but yeah, any last thoughts on all three of these episodes of Dooku's Tales of the Jedi?
One last thing on this episode before I go to like a whole on all three is right after the time skip in this third episode, like from the start of Phantom Menace to the end of Phantom Menace, the confrontation between Yaddle and Dooku at that tree holds significance as well, because Dooku brings up the line of, this held significance to Qui-Gon Jinn as someone who's born on Coruscant and only saw buildings forever, or however he puts it. Like, the living tree was fascinating to someone who's on Coruscant, and then you see in Clone Wars the Coruscant's like layers and layers and layers of city, not just the metropolis to the works or whatever you call it, the industrial area where this episode ends. So I think that the tree and the fact that it looks like it's dying is also sort of representative of Dooku and his transition to the dark side. Because I'm pretty sure I could be wrong, I need to look at, but when it pops up in Clone Wars or the TV show or Clone Wars the movie, I think it pops up a couple times in just backgrounds. It has a lot more leaves than it does in the scene where he's talking to Yaddle in front of the tree.
Yeah, that's a great point, in terms of that, manifestation of like where, Dooku is, and where the Jedi are, maybe. So that's gonna round it out for this episode of the Diary of Dooku. Again, thank you, Soup, for jumping on here and talking about our favorite count for over an hour.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We don't know when the next episode will be. Could be next week, could be next year. Who knows? But we appreciate all of you guys for watching, listening, and commenting and liking and all that good stuff. And we'll see you next time. All right, bye.
Peace.